Hello, good morning, everyone, and welcome. Executive Vice President, keynote speaker, esteemed panelists, esteemed participants, both on Zoom and on social media, directors here present, colleagues, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I wish you a warm welcome to this webinar. My name is Ama Amo, Senior Communications and Events Specialist at Afreximbank. Organized by the Project Preparation Unit of Afreximbank under the theme, the role of project preparation in unlocking regional value chains within the AfCFTA context, with a focus on the extractive sector, this webinar positioning itself as a conversation starter, a platform where experts spanning sectors, name it, policymakers, governments, private sector investors, regulatory authorities, financiers, just to mention but a few, would deliberate, share, and proffer solutions on how the continent can leverage the historic AfCFTA for its industrialization and development agenda. So today we're focusing on the extractive sector, but it's worth noting that there will be similar webinars in the near future with a keen focus on other economic sectors. The session promises to be very exciting and interactive. I'm really looking forward to it. I hope you are too. And we will start with an opening remark by Mr. Am Kamel, Executive Vice President, Business Development and Corporate Banking at Afreximbank, followed by a keynote address by Dr. Paul Jordan, independent consultant and expert on mineral and value chain and regional value chains. And then we will launch into the panel discussion under the topic, Solutions to the Bottlenecks, Preventing the Development of Mineral and Regional Value Chains. And we will have carefully selected panelists to deliberate and discuss the matter, the topic. And they include, of course, the keynote speaker, Dr. Paul Jordan. We will also have Mr. Prudence Sebaidi, Chief Technical Advisor at the AfCFTA Secretariat, Mr. Komi Sohu, Regional Program Advisor, UNDP, Mr. Timbalani Gancho, CEO, Kundamani Manganese Resources, and last but not least, Mr. Zito Alfayo, who is the Head of Project Preparation at Afreximbank. We will also have a Q&A session where you will have opportunity to engage and interact with the panelists, with the speakers. And this is where you are encouraged to share your questions, your comments via chat, and indicating who you are addressing your questions to. And in closing, you have closing remarks by Mr. Ibrahim Sanya, Global Head and Director, Advisory and Capital Markets at Afreximbank. So as earlier indicated, we're live on social media, on Afreximbank handles, on Facebook at African Export-Import Bank, on Twitter at Afreximbank, and on YouTube at Afreximbank Official. So connect with us, share and comment and like our posts. We also, once again, remind you to share your comments, your posts, your comments and your questions via the chat box, and it will be addressed. In the meantime, though, why don't you tell me where you're connecting from? So I'm connecting from Ghana, Accra. My colleagues are in Cairo. Where are you from? Tell me in the chat and I'll acknowledge you. So to get us started, I'd like to call upon Mr. Am Kamel to deliver the opening address, but maybe I should share a bit about him. Mr. Kamel possesses a 35-year career in banking, during which he worked with several international banks, including the Bank of America and JP Morgan Chase, in various capacities in departments ranging from origination, documentary credits, treasury, credit administration, and trade finance. He joined Afreximbank in 1995 as one of the nuclear staff, where he was involved in setting up the operations of the bank. He then progressed through the ranks of Afreximbank until he reached his current position of Executive Vice President, Business Development and Corporate Banking. Just to tell a bit about him, Mr. Kamel has been speaker at several international conferences on trade development and commodity finance. Without much ado, Mr. EVP Am Kamel, The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amma, for this introduction. And distinguished ladies and gentlemen, our esteemed keynote speaker and panelists, dear colleagues, a very good morning to all of you, or afternoon, depending on where you are. Okay, I hope my screen is clear and the voice is clear. On behalf of the President, Professor Benedict Orama, Board and Management of the African Export-Import Bank, I have the singular honor to welcome you all to this webinar. Before I proceed, permit me to acknowledge the presence of Dr. Paul Jordan, our keynote speaker, as well as our esteemed panelists, Mr. Tembelani Gancho, Mr. Prudence Sebati, Mr. Komi Tsu, and of course, my colleague Zito Alfayo. We are privileged and extremely honored that you accepted our invitation to participate at this event despite your tight schedules and demands on your time. I'd also like to warmly welcome our cherished participants from the continent and beyond who have made time to be part of this conversation today. And finally, to thank my colleagues at Afreximbank who worked on producing this important webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa is at a critical juncture in its development aspirations and trajectory. Rightly so, and policymakers have welcomed the historic African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, the AfCFTA, as a game changer, and if fully implemented, has the potential to boost regional income by 7%, or $450 billion in nominal terms, speed up wage growth for women, and uplift 30 million people out of extreme poverty by 2035. Indeed, the successful implementation of the AfCFTA would contribute to mitigating excessive exposure of the continent to the external environment, while at the same time will enable the region to absorb adverse terms of trade shocks emanating from economic and financial crises, including, for instance, the economic impact of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. In the long term, the AfCFTA would contribute to structural transformation of African economies, foster export diversification, promote competitiveness and effective integration into global value chains, while at the same time increasing resilience of the continent to withstand future economic shocks. Unlocking this potential hinges upon increasing the flow and volumes of intra-African trade along the continent's main trade corridors. Addressing this speaks directly to the core mandate and the reason for the establishment of the African Export-Import Bank. The bank's overarching strategy and initiatives are geared towards spearheading the attainment of this noble objective. We are also proud that day after day, Afreximbank continues to prove that African risks are bankable and that intra-African trade finance debt can be a marketable asset class. Available data on the most recent African trade shows that industrial products and manufactured goods exhibit the greatest intra-African trade potential. Furthermore, a closer review of this analysis depicts that 3 key sectors have the potential to drive intra-African trade in the near term. These are the extractive, agro-processing, and automobile manufacturing sectors. This finding affirms that there is a high correlation between expanding intra-African trade and accelerating the process of industrialization on the continent. As such, expanding intra-African trade can lead to what we at Afreximbank call an AfCFTA-led industrialization drive. Ladies and gentlemen, it is this insight that informed the theme of today's conversation themed the role of project preparation in unlocking regional value chains within the AfCFTA context, the extractives sector. We firmly believe a well-harnessed extractive sector can strengthen and lead the continent's post-pandemic recovery. To achieve this, AfCFTA-led industrialization drive requires a close collaboration between the public and private sectors. This calls for governments, regional economic bodies, policymakers, and regulatory authorities to create a trade-enabling environment that fosters and attracts investment on one hand. And on the other hand, we call upon investors to reimagine, reshape, and craft new, bold, and innovative business models to grasp with both hands this opportunity presented by the AfCFTA. Having said that, we have to acknowledge that there are several well-known and well-documented challenges standing in the path towards the achievement of this objective. These can be broadly broken down into 4 key areas: trade facilitation, industrialization promotion, infrastructure development, and access to finance. In the midst of this, the extractive sector is facing a raft of transformational pressures. The extractive sector is facing an unprecedented paradigm shift as it begins to implement new technologies while also managing climate and social challenges. You will agree with me, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, to scale past and overcome these challenges, we require the deployment of new tools and approaches. It is said that you have to do things differently to get different results. That is our challenge and clarion call. At Afreximbank, we envision 3 approaches that, if well implemented, will fundamentally alter the course of the development of the extractive sector on the continent going forward. First, adopting an integrated approach that links mining pit to port and all associated infrastructure in between. Secondly, incorporation of beneficiation and value addition initiatives to mineral resources encompassing backward, forward, and lateral linkages. And thirdly, establishing industrial clusters or ecosystems around the mineral and regional value chains that are underpinned and embed appropriate local content policies. In order to address some of these challenges and execute these approaches, the bank has identified project preparation facilities as critical tools that can fast-track their implementation. For us to unlock these significant downstream benefits, it is imperative that we move upstream to meet member countries and the private sector at their point of need. To this end, Afreximbank established its project preparation facility to act as a catalyst that will work alongside member countries and investors to put in place a trade-enabling environment. The facility will progress projects from concept stage to bankability in a timely manner. It does this by availing early-stage project preparation facilities to finance the preparation of feasibility and bankability studies and procurement of transaction advisors. This intervention aims to de-risk projects, markets, and sectors within the AfCFTA context, the outcome being to supply a steady stream of bankable projects that the private sector can finance to rapidly close the infrastructure and investments gaps on the continent and unleash the full potential of the AfCFTA. Ladies and gentlemen, it is clear that the post-pandemic continent will be different as we migrate to the new normal and will require thorough and forward-looking reflections. No individual stakeholder can have all the answers. It is only by reaching out and deepening the dialogue between our partners that we can provide a better and broader sense of the rapidly evolving landscape. We at the African Export-Import Bank are alive to this fact. It is in this vein that we have invited you all to this webinar to commence this conversation on this important subject. I look forward to stimulating and productive discussions. I would also like to remind you that this webinar is a conversation starter. It is my hope that this webinar will spark and ignite an interest in this approach, that this conversation will continue way after this webinar in your offices and reverberate across the continent and beyond. More importantly, the quality of today's deliberations will continue the reflection of the various stakeholders directly or indirectly involved in steering the emergence of a robust and resilient extractive sector on the continent as they plan for the coming year and beyond. As I conclude, I would like to invite you all to attend the second edition of the Intra-African Trade Fair that is being held in Durban, South Africa. The fair will be held between 15th and 21st of November of this year. This fair is aimed at creating the needed platform to bridge information gaps with a view to boosting trade on the continent. The previous one we did in 2018 was a huge success, and it generated over $30 billion of potential business deals between clients. We therefore look forward to seeing you all in person in Durban. Now, let me hand over the floor back to our moderator, Mr. Amma Amwa, and to thank you all very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, EVP, for your very insightful remarks. 3 points stood out to me. AfCFTA is a game changer, and if fully implemented, it has the potential to boost regional income by 7%. And I really like the point about speeding up wage for growth for women. I also like the point about the fact that the AfCFTA-led industrialization drives requires a close collaboration between public and private sector. And that's really why we're here. Thirdly, the point that stood out to me is really Afreximbank's 3-pronged approach as a contribution to attaining where we want to go. So firstly, adopting an integrated approach that links mining pit, port, and all associated infrastructure to incorporate the incorporation of beneficiation and value addition initiatives to mineral resources encompassing backwards, forward, and lateral linkages. And lastly, establishing industrial clusters and ecosystems around the mineral and regional value chains that are underpinned and embedded appropriate local content policies. So really, this really sets the scene for the conversation yet to be held in more detail. Thank you very much, EVP. So let's do a quick, let's take a quick look at our audience and acknowledge a few. I see some questions trickling in already. Ashili Amen from Paris, I see you. Samuel from Nigeria, I see you too. Mandla, South Africa, thank you for joining. Derek Pitts from South Africa also. Oh, there's one from Ghana. KK Jan, I see you. Special shout out to you. I also see Kabaroni. Oh, Kabaroni, of course, it's morning. And Mulemba from the SADC. I see you. Thank you for joining. I see Mr. Guim Beng from Abidjan. Bonjour, Monsieur Beng. Thank you for joining. I also see Asifiwe Nyenji from Tanzania. Thank you all for joining. So without much ado, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker in the person of Dr. Paul Jordan. Just to share a bit about him, he's an African integrated development expert, specializing in resource-based and spatial development strategies. He has a wide experience working on economic growth and development in South Africa, the SADC West and East Africa. He spent 16 years in Mozambique and Zimbabwe working on as a geologist, geophysicist, and a manager minerals economist before returning to SA in '91. He also designed and managed the SA Industrial Development Zone Program and the Regional Spatial Development Initiative. He's a major contributor to the AU Africa Mining Vision 2009 and Country Mining Vision CMV 2014, and has recently formulated a new regional mining vision RMV 2019 for SADC and the African Union Commodity Strategy 2021. He currently chairs the board of the Koga Development Corporation and is on the Sameldi Steering Committee and Mensa Manufacturers of SA, where he helped establish to build the SA mining supply chain clusters at the new Mandela Mining Precinct. To share a bit about him, I think that's good enough. So that tells you what to look out for, right? He has a BSc in geology, a BA in African government, and a postgraduate diploma in geophysics, and 2 MScs in mineral economics, and a PhD in politics. Ladies and gentlemen, your keynote speaker, Dr. Paul Jordan. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. It's a privilege to be here with such an erudite audience. It's a little bit intimidating. I'm not going to greet all the people I know. It would take quite a while. I think, first just thank everyone for setting this up, especially Zito, and to thank the opening speaker for very interesting opening speech. I found it very useful. I will now launch into the presentation straight away. I'm just going to share my screen. I trust that everyone can see.
Yes, we can.
Good. Great. So I'm looking at resource-based industrialization, which equates broadly to regional mineral value chains. And the need for project preparation facilities and the need to actually realize our African free trade area dream. We're still a long way from it. I get a feeling we're counting our chickens before they hatch. There's a long way between the current situation and the removal of all tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers between us. However, we have the commitment from our leaders, and I'm always optimistic. It will be a hard, slow battle. The battle's not over, it has just begun. Right. So first, I want to basically show that Africa as a whole, if you looked at it as one country, is a minerals economy. Overall, minerals are around 70% of our exports, and of that, it's mainly energy minerals. And this has particular implications given global warming and the transition. It means that although prices are good at the moment for our energy mineral exports, basically oil, gas, and coal, hopefully, I think we all don't want to end up with a climate collapse. Hopefully, these will decrease importance and we will see renewable energy minerals coming to the fore. One can also see in this graph that our export of agricultural commodities is tiny compared to minerals. Our basis here, and I think the opening speaker alluded to this, is that our commodity comparative advantage around minerals, forestry, agriculturals, etc., could, rather than being the curse of resources, could be the blessing. That on top of offering short to medium term comparative advantages, commodity-based industrialization can, with the right industrial policies, serve as a launching pad for long-term diversification and competitiveness in new and non-commodity sectors. This is the message of the Africa Mining Vision, is to make the linkages, the downstream linkages from our commodities into the intermediates and into our manufacturing sector. And the upstream linkages, all of the inputs into commodity production, into capital goods, consumables, services. These are, in many countries in Africa, mainly imported. We need to control the whole value chain, not just the production of commodities. And once this happens, we will be on our way to industrialization of our comparative advantage in resources, both agricultural and mineral. Yeah, this is a table of our commodity exports, and we can see 85% are mineral commodities, agricultural commodities are 15%. But overall, in agricultural commodities, we have a negative trade balance. I found that quite surprising. We actually import more agricultural commodities than we export. And our imports are mainly our old colonial habits. We mainly import wheat, 12 billion a year, because in most of Africa, we cannot grow wheat. The crops are manioc or maize or sorghum, but we got a taste for the European bread, which we can really only grow up in the extreme north in the Maghreb and then in the extreme south of South Africa. Other things is we also got a taste for European beer, so a massive import is barley, which again we can't grow over most of Africa. But if we look here, we also have a big negative balance in industrial minerals and polymers, which shouldn't happen because we have all the raw materials for polymers, which are oil and gas. So what I've labeled here is the low-hanging fruit, which is enormous, which is import displacement, is sitting there where we can actually replace these imports. But more importantly than looking at this table, which is about our commodity trade, is looking at the linkages. What are the products downstream of our commodities, from iron ore into iron, into steel, into intermediates, into, for instance, we heard mention, into motor vehicles. This is what the regional value chains are about. It's taking our commodities, add in the downstream linkages, add in the upstream linkages, or the backward linkages into the inputs into commodity production. For instance, West Africa is 65% of all the inputs into cocoa production. Yet many of these inputs are still imported, yet we are the largest, we are 65% of the world market. We are the largest market for cocoa production inputs in the world. And to realize that market, we need to work together. We need all the African producers to be one single market, which will happen as we move to the continental free trade area. That just quickly gives the breakdown, you know, what 65% of our mineral exports are oil and gas, hydrocarbons, and coal. Precious metals, mainly gold and diamonds, make up 16. The metals, 15, industrial minerals and polymers, 2%, and fertilizer minerals, 2%. Right, this is a slide where I've tried to encapsulate the Africa mining vision into one slide. And I have to admit I failed, but I think I've got about 2/3 of it. So we have the value addition from exploration through mining, smelting, refining to intermediates. Now those intermediates are vital to go into our local development in Africa, into our manufacturing, agriculture, construction, and power and other sectors, but mainly those four. These are the feedstocks into downstream economic activity. However, nearly all of our mineral commodities end up in global value chains, GVCs, are export and don't go into further value addition in Africa. And this is where having a regional continental market would assist. Well, I believe it will assist in allowing Africa to, or facilitating the African use of these commodities in the form of intermediates ready to go into other sectors. We then have our infrastructure linkages that commodities put in, such as transport, rails, road, ports, power, water, ICT, consumption from the wage bill for all wages paid all along our value chain, the fiscal linkages, which are our levies, duties, royalties, corporate income tax, resource rent taxes, withholding taxes, etc. And then, of course, vitally into the whole value chain, the knowledge linkages. Geo-knowledge, are we investing in discovering further mineral deposits? Human capital development, especially STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, If we want to achieve our ambitions, we have to up our game on STEM skills formation, engineers and scientists, technicians, operators, etc. And then technology development, RDI, research, development, and innovation. All of these, the knowledge linkages feed into the upstream or backward linkages, the capital goods, machinery, plant, equipment, consumables into mining, explosives, wear parts, chemicals, etc. Services, numerous services servicing the sector, many of which are currently imported, and then other inputs such as utilities. And then the final prize in this are lateral linkages, where these backward linkages slowly are capable of supplying other sectors and cease to be dependent on the minerals market and start supplying other sectors into the local, regional, and global economy. All of this takes place within a national framework, within a regional economic community, within a continental economy, and within the global economy. What the Africa Mining Vision is the realization of all of the linkages to the minerals value chain, from exploration to intermediate mineral products. We need to make all of these linkages, but they are interlinked. You can't make one without the other. Without the fiscal linkages, we can't invest in skills and technology development, which means we will not be able to develop the capital goods, the mining machinery, etc. That is very dependent on STEM skills formation and technology development. So we need to do them together. And the target is also the downstream into manufacturing. We want to be producing all of the steel into the motor industry, etc. So these are the downstream forward linkages, the key sectors. So into manufacturing, the main ones are steel and the steel alloys, polymers, base metals, and something very mundane, salt, into our chlor-alkali industries. Of these, steel is by far the biggest. The world consumes more than 10 times more steel than all other metals combined. So when you think of your platform, your basis for manufacturing, think steel 10 times and think copper, aluminium, zinc, etc. once. So the world consumes about now 1.7, 1.8 billion tons of steel and less than 200 million tons of all other metals combined. So when you look at a motor vehicle, what is it? It's various steel alloys and plastics or polymers. That's what makes up 90% of a motor vehicle. So those are the two important feedstocks into manufacturing, polymers or plastics and steel. Then energy, at the moment, what's important are fossil fuels, but increasingly RE, renewable energy minerals that are just starting, silicon, lithium, cobalt, zinc, vanadium, rare earth elements, etc. Then into infrastructure, and yet again, steel. Half of steel globally goes into building, construction, and infrastructure. Cement sounds mundane, but it's critical for our development. Copper, aluminium, particularly for electricity, and also into infrastructure. Of course, you've got to wire all the buildings. And then clays, which again, mundane, but into ceramics. Various household ceramics, ceramics like tiles, bricks, etc., sanitary ware, and then more mundane aggregates. All of these are critical feedstocks into infrastructure. And then agriculture, mainly NPK, nitrogen, phosphate, and potassium, critical for increasing yields for most Africans are peasant farmers, and the cost-effective availability of NPK will make an enormous difference. Then we have producer power, where in some cases, Africa has producer power, where it can use its dominance of resources in the PGMs, the platinum group metals, in cobalt and diamonds. These could be used to leverage the down and upstream linkages, like, for instance, Botswana has done in moving diamond sorting and polishing from London to Gaborone to some extent. Finally, the other more exotic minerals, such as gemstones or tantalum, niobium, tungsten, molybdenum, these could be beneficiated, but these are not major inputs into our immediate manufacturing and development aspirations. These will go into international value chains, but at least we could add a bit more value and add a bit more employment before we export them. So this is not as complicated as it seems. Basically, we have here 6 groups are the key feedstocks. You notice that I haven't included any of the precious metals because they're not key feedstocks into the well-being of our people. So they are ferrous, that's steel, including the coatings, also manganese, all goes into steel as a scavenger and as a alloy. Then we have polymers, which we are aware of, the polyethylene, polypropylene, polyvinyl chloride, etc. Base metals, particularly copper with the new renewable energy. A battery operated car uses between 4 and 8 times more copper than the old internal combustion engine. Fossil fuels, which, as I said, this we need to plan a transition away from our fossil fuel consumption and into renewables. Cement will be there for some time to come. NPK fertilizers, probably the biggest immediate impact on most people if we could get fertilizers to all Africa's farmers at a cost competitive price. And then chlor-alkali industry is, of course, also vital. Simple things like caustic soda, etc., are also important. So we have a critical constraint in any one country trying to realize that, and that is scale economies. For many of these, as you go downstream, the scale economies are enormous. Like, for instance, for oil, if you want to put in a refinery today, you need it to be bigger than 200,000 barrels per day, which is bigger than the consumption of most African states. So we need to join together to achieve scale economies. The second is that as we go downstream, we end up with only one producer, and we get monopoly pricing. Again, we need to widen our markets through the continental trade area to ensure rivalry and competition. We need regional economic community and continental strategies, which we are here to talk about. Is basically a continental strategy where the market will be more than big enough to have rivalry and competition and to contain monopoly pricing, and will be big enough for nearly all scale economies for all of our forward linkages and backward linkages. The market for, say, front-end loaders in Africa is big enough for many producers, but if we look, we only have 2 or 3 producers of front-end loaders in Africa. I think only a couple in Egypt and a couple in South Africa. So key constraints, barriers to interregional trade. We've spoken about this at many fora, tariffs and non-tariff barriers. So we really need the rapid realization of our continental free trade area aspirations, but we need to go further. We need to move to an African common external tariff system and customs union, that then we can have an African industrial strategy where our continental tariffs are designed to develop our local African manufacturing industry. Also, we need to acknowledge, and it was also mentioned earlier, that member states are increasingly putting in local content policies in extractives, oil, gas, and minerals that fail to recognize African content. So on the one hand, we're signing on to a continental free trade area. On the other hand, we are hobbling it by not recognizing value added in other African states in our local content obligations. This could be done by not recognizing it completely, but at a discounted rate. But right now, most African countries, their local content policies diminish their neighbors to that of being an import from abroad. So we consider our neighbor the same as China or a European import. We need to tackle that. We need to have regional content, because local content will not have the economies of scale. So we want to take advantage of the continental market in terms of both supply and demand. We need to align our local content policies that they do somehow recognize things made in other African states. The other one is access to finance for investment into resources, linkages industries, the backward and forward linkages. And for those, we need project preparation. You will not attract any finance without a good PFS, at least a pre-feasibility study. So we need to do scans, PFSs on regional value chain, infrastructure and industrial investment projects up and down the value chain in order to raise project finance. So a prerequisite for getting finance is generally a clear viability of the project through a PFS and later a BFS, a bankable feasibility study. So here is just, I try to make a diagram showing what I'm saying. Africa has a huge resource base of all the minerals we need for development, whilst any single member state only has a subset of those resources. So once we join together, we have all that we need. Also, we have a massive market that every member state can base a much more viable and coherent resource-based industrialization strategy. So the key is we've got to go big and be part of a bigger formation in order for us to reach those economies of scale for both upstream and downstream industry viability. I'm going to skip this slide in the interest of time. This was an example in the SADC regional mining vision proposed to overcome this. We need a venture capital fund, regional African mining value addition development agency, which would provide funding for PFSs on projects, would provide debt funding up to 90%, and equity, obviously, up to 49%. And what it recommended was that this funding would be proportional to the inverse of the country's GDP per capita. Therefore, the amount of funding would be very high for a poor country and would be lower for a rich country, to try and overcome the concept of variable geometry, overcome the fact that if we all join together, the stronger economies will in fact surge ahead and benefit disproportionately more than the weaker economies, even though overall it's not a zero-sum game. Overall, it will be displacing imports, so there'll be no losers, but some countries would gain more than others. Therefore, this was an idea floated that we assist the weaker countries to catch up as fast as possible. There are many, in fact, I think there are about over 20 project preparation facilities available for infrastructure projects, but there are very few that will fund industrial projects, the downstream and upstream linkage industries. So in order to build the regional mineral value chains, resources are needed for industrial investment project preparation, particularly those that target the key missing links in the regional value chains. We have a few, like the Industrial Development Corporation in South Africa. We have the TDA in the US that also funds industrial projects, and the CDC, but we need the Afreximbank unit to really fill the gap around industrial projects where African entrepreneurs need assistance to do pre-feasibility studies in order to attract finance and the funds to do full bankable feasibility studies. Ideally, we need an African industrial DFI, not that is focused on industrial projects rather than infrastructure projects. Not to diminish infrastructure projects, they also are vital. They are two sides of the same coin. But right now, there's many more resources available for infrastructure projects. So we need an industrial DFI that would partner the private sector in industrial developments through project preparation, project financing, as well as inter-African trade financing, all along our regional continental value chains. Very quickly, we would move from the identification of investment projects by virtually everyone. What are the key projects we need? What are the missing links in these value chains? And this would be the regional economic communities, private sector, Afreximbank, AfDB, all of them. Then we would move to project scans, which is like a pre-feasibility study, just to see would this be viable, then into a pre-feasibility study, and that's where we need project preparation facilities to assist, such as Afreximbank and industrial DFIs. The identification of project operator and partners, again, this is what a project preparation facility should be doing. These would clearly be from the private sector. We also want to bring the development finance institutions with cheaper debt and equity on board. We need then to move to the rather expensive project bankable feasibility study between 3 and 5% of the total capital or capex costs of the project. Again, the project preparation facilities are critical. The project operator would now be also investing, and the other equity partners. The project financing would be arranged by the preparation facility, although the preparation facility will not actually provide finance. And then we have the project operator will provide equity. The partners, banks would provide debt, DFIs would provide both debt and equity. And finally, where we want to be is the implementation of the project. That would be the private sector together with DFIs, the development finance institution, who could also take minority equity in the project. I would suggest that we should target the up and downstream industries more than the commodity production investment projects. We find that, we can fairly easily raise money for mining projects, but we struggle to raise money for the downstream beneficiation projects and the upstream mining inputs, capital goods projects. So my suggestion would be the up and downstream linkages area should be prioritized. We could also consider, like I said earlier, the SADC proposal, the co-funding for regional value chain preparation could possibly be higher or greater for the poorer African member states, possibly using the inverse of GDP per capita as a metric. Coming to the end, African countries have a real opportunity to capitalize on their resource endowments to promote economic transformation through commodity-based industrialization, downstream and upstream. The AU, the new Africa Commodity Strategy mission statement states that its mission is the optimal utilization of our commodities to drive value addition, sustainable industrialization, and trade for transformative and inclusive development. This mission could be realized through building of regional value chains by developing the key investment projects aided by a project preparation facilities such as the Afreximbank one. Finally, my conclusion is a quote from a Pan-Africanist, by far the greatest wrong which the departing colonialists inflicted upon us, and which we now continue to inflict upon ourselves in our present state of disunity, was to leave us divided into economically unviable states which bear no possibility for real development. A great man, Kwame Nkrumah. Thank you all. Asante, merci, obrigado, shukran.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jordan. You couldn't have said it any better, especially with that quote at the end. A lot of things stood out to me. I dare say that this is a thought-provoking presentation. And I'm really looking forward to discussing a bit more in detail with the panelists and really demonstrating how relevant stakeholders are playing out in the achievement of this regional value chain for development. I also thank you for making it very practical. When you talk about salt, I could relate in many ways. A few things stood out to me, but I'd like to touch on the linkages, which I find very critical for development and how they contribute to improving livelihoods in communities around industrial projects. When you talk about infrastructure linkages, fiscal, knowledge, lateral consumption, backward, forward, and the likes. And I really find it very practical. Thank you. We'll have opportunity to discuss more in the panel discussion, as I said. Friends, I hope you are being very engaged as I am. And let's look out for more detail, for more engagement at the panel session. Please remember to share your questions ahead. We've had an opening remark. You've also had a keynote address. What is trickling you at this point? Share ahead so that they could be addressed during the panel. So if you just joined us, welcome. We're discussing the role of project preparation in unlocking regional value chains within the AfCFTA context, with a focus on the extractive sector. We like to acknowledge our participants on Zoom as well as on social media. We are streaming live. And a few friends have just popped in and said hi. Selma, I see you. I saw Tashinga Kayemba. Welcome from South Africa. I also saw Ronald Kabagambe from Kigali, and Fatou Sal from West Africa Energy. Thank you for joining. It's time for the crux of the matter, as we say, the moment of truth, the panel discussion. It is positioned under the topic, Solutions to the Bottlenecks, Preventing the Development of Mineral and Regional Value Chain. With a carefully selected panel, we will discuss why the extractive sector in the first place. Where are we today? Where do we want to go in this space? And how do we leverage the extractives for Africa's industrialization development? We will also deliberate on how African governments are responding to the need for creating an enabling environment for industry to thrive. We will look at how policymakers are contributing in enacting and creating a legal framework that supports investment, as Dr. Jordan said, looking at how we're harmonizing our legal framework tariffs across the continent. We will discuss the role of the private sector in creating this regional value chain that we seek to achieve. And of course, we'll also discuss development financial institutions, their role, how are they contributing? The likes of Afreximbank as an example, which is operating through collaborations with best practice in class, with partnering with global practitioners. We have a few examples around the African Medical Center of Excellence in Nigeria with King's College, the ACAC with Bureau Veritas, the Industrial Park with Arise Integrated and Industrial Platform, to mention but a few. We will learn more about how we're positioning ourselves as a DFI in supporting this vision. So ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce our panelists. I'd like to start with the private sector. Mr. Tembelani Gancho is the CEO of Kundumani Manganese Resources. Prior to Kundumani, he was the Vice President of Mining and Metals at ABSA Capital, and he was responsible for several mining and metals clients across various commodities. Tembelani has managed, structured, and executed numerous corporate finance transactions within the South Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa as part of the various executive and senior roles he has held in ABSA Capital, Extracta, now Glencore, and Ernst & Young. He holds a business science honors degree in finance from the University of Cape Town and a postgraduate diploma from the Gordon Institute of Business Science. Mr. Gancho, you're welcome. I move on to a policymaker, a technical advisor. Mr. Prudence Sebahamizi is the Chief Technical Advisor at the AfCFTA Secretariat here in Accra. He provides technical and strategic advice to the Secretary General on the AfCFTA institution. He was the head of the AfCFTA Negotiation Support Unit at the AU since August 2016, where he was the overall coordinator of AfCFTA negotiations and coordinated a team of senior experts and advisors on various issues under negotiations. Prior to his appointment, his current appointment, he led a team of experts who provided technical assistance and strategic guidance to strengthen the capacity of the AU Department of Trade and Industry to more effectively drive the AfCFTA preparatory process since 2015. He was the lead technical advisor to the Department of Trade and Industry of AU at the AfCFTA. Prudence holds a master's degree in international development policy from Seoul National University, South Korea. Prudence, you're welcome. May I kindly ask you to turn on your cameras? Thank you. Moving on to another policymaker, Mr. Komitsu is an economist currently working as Regional Program Advisor, AfCFTA, with the UNDP Regional Service Center in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Before joining the UNDP, Komi served as economist dealing with regional integration, trade, and industrialization issues at the Africa Trade Policy Center of UNECA, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Komi previously worked as commodity specialist at the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development in Geneva, as investment officer and researcher in the financial services sector in Canada. In his various roles at the UN, Komi advises both private and public actors across Africa and beyond on various issues ranging from trade, industrialization, and value chains development within the context of the AfCFTA. Komi graduated in quantitative economics and holds an MBA in finance. Bienvenue, Monsieur Nsoro.
Merci.
Representing a development financial institution, Mr. Zito Alfayo is a career development banker with in-depth experiences across the full project finance value chain, encompassing financial advisory, corporate and project finance, and structured trade finance. In his current role as head of project preparation at Afreximbank, he is leading Afreximbank's upstream intervention aimed at promoting intra-Africa trade, industrialization, and export development activities. Prior to his current appointment, Zito spent 5 years as a member of Afreximbank's project and asset-based finance team. In this role, he was very instrumental in motivating various landmark infrastructure-related projects across the continent, notably the Mozambique LNG project and Vul Gabon mining and Zim borders. Zito holds an MBA from Strathmore Business School, an executive MBA for EISE Business School, and a BSc in electronics engineering from the Jomo Kenyatta University. He's also a certified public accountant. Zito, you're welcome. Last but not least, I invite our keynote speaker, who has already been introduced prior, Dr. Jordan. You're also welcome. Can I please see, can you kindly turn on your cameras, panelists? Thank you. Great. So I choose to start from the private sector. Mr. Gancho, tell us, how have you been financing the development phase of new projects and investment in which you found yourself?
Well, I must say good afternoon to everyone. It's not it hasn't been an easy journey for us, unfortunately, in financing our operations or projects. In that we've had to rely on shareholder funds as well as funds generated from our operations. As a junior miner, we found it extremely challenging to raise project funding when we started our operations. And by the time that these funding institutions warmed up to our project and wanted to support us, we're at a point of development where we really didn't need the funding anymore because we're effectively developed and we're operating at an optimal state. So it's unfortunate that it ended that way, but we found that funding institutions kind of make it difficult for junior miners, if I look at in our space, to access funding, which tends to lead to projects either starting up very late or projects failing to start or never see the light of day. But it is a challenging space, and you got to work quite hard to raise the funding to start up a project in our space, unfortunately.
Yeah, thank you for that. So clearly there's a gap on financing. May I take a double take on asking and finding out what, from a private sector perspective, what are some of the key opportunities that you envisage under the AfCFTA agreement?
Well, I mean, the free trade agreement creates a bigger single market for Africa, I think 1.2 billion people. And this is by removing your soft infrastructure impediments, such as customs and other regulatory trade barriers. So some of these opportunities that can come to bear, we as private sector foresee improved capital flows, which will facilitate greater capital investments, driving the introduction of new technologies to boost productivity, to enhance competitiveness, the development of value addition systems, as well as easing the process of importing raw materials from other African countries to enable the establishment of manufacturing plants and thereby creating cheaper means of production, which I think Dr. Jordan spoke about in creating that scalability. The overall opportunities for this collaborative action brought about by this free trade agreement, it's allowing Africans to freely do business with each other, and this can only strengthen Africa's resilience and it dials back the trade dependency on foreign markets.
Great, this is impressive. Thank you. Prudence, with the set expectations of the AfCFTA, we moved from the Africa mining vision and now to the AfCFTA. How does the AfCFTA complement the Africa mining vision in light of the expectations that have been set by Mr. Gancho? And perhaps if you want to extend that to letting us know where we are around the AfCFTA's operationalization and maybe some milestones that we have chalked so far and what needs to be done. Sorry, I'm putting a pack I'm putting a pack on you right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amma. Let me also start by greeting everyone. Good afternoon and good morning, depending on where you are. Indeed, it's a pleasure to be on this distinguished panel to discuss this very important topic. Before I take on your question, I think it's very important to understand in a nutshell what the milestones that we have so far achieved in the AfCFTA. And of course, looking at it from the perspective of providing a solution to what Dr. Paul Jordan has already highlighted as key challenges that we face as Africa. I would like to mention that the AfCFTA agreement, which was signed in March 2018 in Kigali, is now at operational stage. We have 54 countries out of 55 that have already signed the agreement. And out of those, we have already 42 have ratified it, which is a good indication that there is a strong political will to have this market. With regard to value addition, with regard to industrialization of the continent, with regard to connecting the AfCFTA to Africa mining vision, I would like to focus our attention more on the part of market access in the AfCFTA agreement, and also the part on rules of origin, because these are the basis for industrializing the continent. The AfCFTA aims to liberalize trade by removing progressively tariff on up to 97% of all tariff lines. It means that in the next 15 years, because the time frame for liberalization ranges from 5 to 15 years, depending on the category of the country. So we hope that in the next 15 years, at least we could have achieved full liberalization on about 97% of goods that will be traded across African countries. And this means, of course, those products that would have been processed and produced from within the continent. And that's where the element of rules of origin is very important. This AfCFTA does not forget the industrial policy at national level, because for us to get there, we also have to develop our industrial base. That's why the 3% of the total products has been designated to be excluded from tariff liberalization. And this 3% can be used as a policy space by countries to develop their nascent industries. And coming back to rules of origin, which is a very key component of the AfCFTA in responding to issues of industrialization of the continent. The two key objectives of AfCFTA rules of origin is, first of all, to achieve Africa's industrialization through development of regional and continental value chains. And the second objective is to boost intra-Africa trade by addressing the challenges of transshipment. So if you hear the keywords here is development of regional value chains, and the keyword here is avoid the challenge of transshipment. The development of regional value chain is mainly industrializing the continent, adding value to our raw materials, which we have in abundance, statistics can tell, and also dealing with the products that have been traditionally imported from outside the continent. And that's where now we have to deal with those products that have been produced outside Africa, but that have been dumped on Africa's market, even if they do not satisfy the requirements of the AfCFTA rules of origin. They could be there, and then they could be hindering our objectives of industrializing the continent. So the rules of origin are very key to deal with that challenge, addressing issue of industrialization, but also dealing with transshipment of those products that are coming from outside Africa. Currently, the AfCFTA rules of origin are crafted in a way that they will satisfy a number of criteria. First of all, you will have products which are fully produced from within the continent. Like here we are talking about mineral products, for example. We are talking about plants, vegetables, live animals. All those products, fish, they qualify to be traded across the continent without paying import duties. The second criteria, which is also important, a product has to undergo a substantial transformation. It means you have to add value to that product. If you have imported it from outside the continent, then you have to add value to that product in order for it to qualify to be sold on AfCFTA market. And this is a very important criteria, again, in making sure that we industrialize the continent. And in the process of industrializing the continent, we'll be creating jobs and we'll be adding value, but we also be importing technology for us to be at the same level of economic transactions with the rest of the world. And there is one important principle, which I think the private sector has to understand in trying to satisfy these rules of origin. There is what we call the principle of accumulation, which means that if you are producing from one country, let's say you are producing in Kenya, where you have your industrial base, you can outsource raw materials from wherever in Africa. And then those raw materials that you have used in the production process, whether it is labor, whether it is minerals, whether it is any other inputs into the production process, as long as they come from within Africa, they will be considered as originating from AfCFTA market. So you can 100% produce without necessarily relying on import from outside, because the continent is big enough. So I think that's in a nutshell what the AfCFTA looks to link the AfCFTA market to the Africa mining vision. It's through elimination of tariff to allow circulation of products across the continent, and it's through the AfCFTA rules of origin that gives life to Africa's industrialization.
Great. Thank you so much, Prudence. Participants, I hope you are still being engaged. Access to market, rules of origin, elimination of tariffs. I would like to move on to another policymaker, Mr. Nsobu, I know you just crossed carpets, as we say commonly. What do you think should be the role of international agencies? What role should they play in supporting the operationalization of the AfCFTA? And which key areas need focus from your perspective?
Thanks. Thanks, Amma, for the question. Thanks also, colleagues. Prudence, Dr. Jordan, long time we haven't met, but always good to hear you. And of course, Zito for also organizing this and Tembelani as well for the great perspective from the private sector. As you know, the AfCFTA will be implemented, of course, at the continental level. Each country will have to implement the agreement. There are regional components in the agreement because of existing regional agreement. The Secretariat will be kind of supporting, coordinating all these efforts. And we shouldn't also forget that African countries have also committed to international trade arrangement. So all these kind of baskets mean that international institutions, whether regional, Pan-African, continental, or global, have a key role to play in supporting negotiation and implementation, and this has already started. A number of institutions have been supporting AfCFTA negotiation, providing technical support on specific issues. But most importantly, a lot of institutions as well, international institutions, whether United Nations institutions such as UNECA, the UN Economic Commission for Africa, the United Nations Development Program, UNCTAD, the UN Conference on Trade and Development, ITC, WTO, and others have been providing support and will continue. Development Bank as well. I think Afreximbank, as you know, has been playing a key role in supporting, trans-African payment system. World Bank is also supporting some countries and regions to implement the agreement. Now, based on what we are experiencing now within the continent, where many countries have been severely, let I say, impacted negatively by the COVID, we can expect that financial constraint will mean that many countries are not able to put all the provisions of the agreement in place right now because they have some financial constraint. And here again, I think there are few areas where I see international agency to continue supporting. One being, how do we make sure the continent, the countries actually implement the provisions of the agreement? The agreement is there, it will not work by itself, it has to be implemented. Countries need to enact laws, legislation, revise their tariff book to match it with the AfCFTA provision. Second, capacity building. Prudence mentioned the fact that countries or private sector need to understand the rules of origins. That actually are a set of rules that tells you how you process or how you transform a product so that for the item or the final good to be accepted under the AfCFTA rule and then enjoy the tariff benefits. So capacity building is important. It's also important to really ensure that the agreement is inclusive. Amma, you mentioned the fact that the agreement can unlock the potential of women, but this is not automatic. And a lot of also international institutions are supporting countries to have additional actions in place to make the agreement very inclusive. Another point that is key, and then I think banks need to also come in strongly, is the access to trade finance. The gap currently, according to estimates, is that the annual trade finance gap in Africa is about 91 billion USD. So if we are not able to address those issues related to trade finance, I don't think African can produce made in African product toward AfCFTA market. But let's not forget that within the AfCFTA context, a private sector within Africa will have to compete with those MNEs that will also come in strongly to process value-added product, whether mineral or agro-food product within the continent. So if the continent want to retain more resources, more financial or more value, it's important to really allow access to finance. So these are some of the key issues so far, I think very, very important to promote regional value chain across the continent under the AfCFTA. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Towut. This is very insightful. Clearly, this, for want of a better word, this issue, this concern, this vision has a multifaceted approach and definitely a multi-stakeholder approach. We all have a role to play, dragging it from different directions to ensure that we achieve what we want. Thank you very much. This is very insightful. We'll move on to Mr. Alfayo. How do we position ourselves? And here we, rightly so, from an Afreximbank's perspective, how do we position ourselves in the midst of all this? So the scene has been created, the opportunity stated, the gap clearly, we know what the beast is. We know where we want to go. Tell us a bit more about how Project Preparation Facility seeks to position itself as one of the solutions for exploration.
Thank you very much, Ama, and good afternoon, fellow participants, panelists. First and foremost, before addressing the issue of how we've positioned our project preparation facility, it's important for us to take a step back to understand why Afreximbank, Africa's premier trade finance institution, established a project preparation facility in the first place. As we are all aware, in 1993, Afreximbank was established, and the overarching objective of Afreximbank being established was really to support intra and extra African trade flows. Fast track to 2016, when Afreximbank came up with its strategy, Impact 2021. Under this particular strategy, we deliberately identified two key pillars that will support the promotion of intra-African trade. First and foremost is the Intra-African Trade Initiative, which is our arrowhead and the strategic thrust under which we intervene across the continent. And underpinning this particular arrowhead is the industrialization and export development pillar. Now, further to what Dr. Paul Jordan had mentioned, we clearly saw what the gaps are and the kind of interventions that are required. They're quite vast. In this year, we saw that the AfCFTA was operationalized. Now, we are cognizant of the fact that in order for us to drive this, which speaks directly to our development agenda, it's important that we understand what is expected of the continent, what is expected of institutions such as Afreximbank, so that we can make the right interventions in this particular regard. Now, we did a market assessment of the continent, and what we saw were three key findings. First and foremost, the debt levels on the continent were going up again, and this was at about 60% according to the IMF. This is now even higher in light of what transpired with COVID. The second thing that we saw was that the existing infrastructure is not sufficient to ensure that intra-African trade can thrive. Because what we noted was that the infrastructure that's prevalent in the continent is geared towards exports outside the country, so outside the continent. And it's not geared towards beneficiation and value addition. The third thing that we noted was that there's a huge private sector interest in bankable projects, estimated at about $100 trillion. And these funds sit with institutional investors, such as insurance companies, pension funds, and sovereign wealth funds. However, the key challenge and the call we always hear when we engage with some of these private sector investors is that there are no bankable projects. They keep insisting and telling us as development banks that should you de-risk transactions, bring them to the market, we're more than happy to participate. Now, in response to that, as our Executive Vice President alluded to earlier on in his opening remarks, there was definitely a need for us to come up with new tools and approaches and instruments so that we can bridge this gap. One of these responses was to come up with a project preparation facility. Now, what we also noted was that when we did a market scan of the prevailing project preparation facilities on the continent, we noted two key things. First and foremost, most project preparation facilities were geared towards trade-enabling infrastructure. We also quickly realized that should we participate only in supporting trade-enabling infrastructure interventions, will not be able to ensure that trade will flow, at least, or this will take quite a while. Why? Because there will not be a certain number of institutions or a critical mass of institutions that can do businesses or ride on top of this infrastructure. So what we said was we were going to broaden our intervention. And again, in response to what Dr. Jordan had mentioned, the fact that there are few project preparation facilities that participate or support industrialization activities. So it's in that regard, when we looked at the market, we realized there is a gap. That's the first thing that we realized. Then we realized that from a policy relevance perspective and the additionality that we stand to gain, it was imperative for Afreximbank to pivot and change its mindset and deviate from being a primary lender that we've been all along and move up the value chain, move upstream to become a developer where we can put in patient capital, a developer who can put in money at risk, a developer who can partner with government entities, member countries, regional economic bodies, and the private sector so that we can meet them at their point of need, so that we can take risk alongside them, bring our convening power, our about 28 years experience in developing the continent, so that we can come up with solutions that can address their needs so that we can get to bankability. Now, when we assessed this particular market, again, very interesting insights came up. One of the things that we realized was that the gap is significant. The African Development Bank, some years back, estimated at between $130 to $190 billion per annum. Even in the best of times, in 2018, 2019, the highest debt, the highest funding that was arranged by the country was about 88 billion, still not sufficient. Now, when COVID comes into play, the AfCFTA comes into operation, we realize that these gaps are bigger, the approaches need to be different. So we have now decided that Afreximbank on its own is not in a position to do this on its own. We are deploying a collaborative approach. We are talking to like-minded investors and institutions, such as members on this particular panel. We're talking to private sector investors, we're talking to the AfCFTA Secretariat, we're talking to UNDP, we're talking to UNECA, and we're talking to also industry practitioners. For example, we've entered into partnerships with institutions such as TeleDB, who's one of the leading railway operators on the continent, so that we can address that particular gap. And we're looking to explore and get into other strategic and smart partnerships so that we can bridge out the gaps. Now, with regard to how we've positioned our project preparation facility, first and foremost, this facility can be tapped into by three key parties. First and foremost, member countries who are our shareholders, regional economic bodies, and the private sector. So you do note that as long as you're an entity that is geared towards unlocking development impact on the continent, we're more than happy to support you. The second thing is that we intervene through two particular windows. First and foremost is the trade enabling infrastructure window, under which we support energy transactions, be it both renewable or thermal. Second is the transport and logistics, which is road, rail, air, and maritime transport. Third is ICT. The other key window of intervention is what we call manufacturing and service exports. In this particular window, we support sectors such as the extractive sector, which is the subject of this particular webinar, agro-processing, healthcare, hospitality and tourism, or any other sector that has a value-added component and or export development angle. With regards to the activities that we support with this project preparation facility, you will note that first and foremost, we do the traditional role of project preparation facilities, which is to prepare bankability and feasibility studies. The second thing that we do is that we support with the procurement of transaction advisors. This may be legal, technical, or financial. We also assist project developers and sponsors to procure project managers because we are alive and cognizant of the fact that certain project sponsors and developers may not have sufficient skills and capacity to implement these projects. So we put in place or identify project managers who can complement their skills so that they can oversee the implementation of these projects. Last but not least is what we call the last mile activities or the fundraising activities. Once we've come up with the information memorandum and the complete set of documentation, we also assist project developers and sponsors to take these transactions to the market. And the key reason being that should the transaction not close, then our job is not yet done. We need to ensure that they can meet the benchmarks set by financial institutions, be it on the debt side or the equity side, so that we can get to timely financial close. The facility can be offered in either dollars, US dollars, or euros. Typical terms are such that repayment should be within a 3-year period and is aligned to financial close. The key rationale being to ensure that we align the interest of the developer and the sponsor so that we can get repaid at that point in time. This is a bullet loan. It's a bullet loan that's paid over 3 years. The other key thing that I would like to highlight with regards to how we've structured this facility is the fact that once the project gets to bankability, we invite our downstream teams, be it the export development team, the intra-African trade team, or the project finance teams, so that they can come in and also avail the longer term funding. Because at the end of the day, Afreximbank's intervention is geared towards financial close and success. We do not stop at the point of bankability. So to that end, what we've done is we ensure that we have a handshake with the incoming teams. They refinance the project preparation facility out, and they proceed with the incoming debt finance teams. Last but not least, we've also positioned the project preparation facility in such a manner that we ensure that Afreximbank is appointed as the mandated lead arranger. This is deliberate due to the fact that some of the transactions that we have supported are significant in scale and value. And we need the values of an MLA with the capacity and the wherewithal to ensure that we can invite and crowd in like-minded investors. I'm also happy to report that Afreximbank, as mandated lead arranger, is the #1 MLA arranger. And in the last year's Bloomberg results, we were actually voted #1. So when Afrexibank's MLA team come on board, we can developers and sponsors can rest assured that we will close the transaction in a timely manner. So in a nutshell, that's the Afreximbank's project preparation facility. It's unique in the sense that it's a loan. We do not take up equity, deliberately so that we do not dilute our investors. We are not participating to dilute them, but to assist them so that we can close these gaps in a very short time so that we can get repaid and go and do other projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Zito. There you have it. If you're here as private sector investor, if you need financing, you know where to go. If you're looking for a one-stop shop solution, you know where to go. You know what door to knock on. Thank you, Zito. Great. I will come back to you, Dr. Jordan. You really set the scene, you sowed the seed, you talked about the vision, you talked about where we are and how we need to get to the attainment of the vision. What are some of the, perhaps in a few words, what are some of the key prerequisites from your perspective for the successful implementation of an AfCFTA-led industrialization drive?
Thank you, Madase. I think I mentioned them in my presentation. The first is we don't have it. We don't have a continental free trade area yet. And I'm optimistic we're going to have one, but we can't lose sight of the ball. We have to keep working day and night. I think Prudence will agree with me. We've still got a long way to go in creating a true free trade area with unfettered intracontinental trade. So I think number one is, let's not just say because we have announced it that we have it. On the ground, business people will tell you we don't have it yet, right? Those that are trying to trade. Then the other prerequisite to me for this to work is we've got to put Africa above extra African countries. We have to start not having sibling rivalry with our neighbors, but rather to see our neighbors as comrades. to see them as family. You know, sibling rivalry, okay, but let's be brothers and sisters. And I think Prudence mentioned something really important, and that's the principle of accumulation. And if in the mining sector, including hydrocarbons, we're going to have local content policies that exclude our brothers and sisters, we're not going to accumulate anything. There will be no accumulation. So we need to recognize each other, albeit it could be at a discounted rate. So we could, for instance, and this is something I'm giving to Prudence and his colleagues, we could say, right, all of our local content laws, we will recognize other African countries at 80% of the value. But we'll recognize foreign countries, say China, at 0%, obviously. You know, that's not either African content or the country concerned content. So I find that that's really important, because we seem to be pulling in two different directions. We have increasing local content, which is also good, but that then undermines our regional ambition and undermines the regional advantages. I think the other is what Zito mentioned. We need much easier access to capital, and in most of our countries, we have a problem that the cost of capital is extremely high. I've just returned from Lusaka, where the cost of capital for an entrepreneur is over 20%. Very few projects are going to be able to withstand the cost of money being 20%, and then on top of that, wanting a decent return. So if your return's only 10%, you're already at 30%. How many projects can withstand the 30% hurdle rate? So we need some system, which Afreximbank is providing to some extent, of much cheaper capital, not only for transactions, import, export, but for investments. And maybe Zito could elucidate on how, I know he is focused on this, and that the Afreximbank is focused on this, on how we are going to get an African cost of capital that's affordable for our entrepreneurs. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jordan. As you said, no silo mentality, no sibling rivalry. We need to work together as one family to achieve the vision. Yes, we need to promote local content, but we need to keep our eyes on the ball, because we're seeking to build regional value chains. Thank you, Doc. Appreciate it. We still have a bit of time, so I would like to take another round of questions, and we'll move straight to the question and answer. Participants, please do share your questions in the chat. This is getting very interesting. There's a lot of expertise around the table. If you're here as a financier, if you're here as an investor, these are the resources, these are the insights that you need. So feel free to share your questions in the chat, and they will be addressed. Similarly, also with our audience online, feel free to share your questions. They will be addressed as well. I'm coming back to you, Mr. Gancho. I mean, you are the private sector, and if I take a cue from Dr. Jordan's initial assertion on the prerequisite, he said we don't have it yet. So yes, we're making progress. We have operationalized the AfCFTA. We have a number of 47 countries have ratified. 42 countries have ratified out of the 54 member countries. We're making progress. It is appreciable. We still have quite a bit to go. Now, from the end user perspective, you are the private sector, you are on the ground. Do you envisage any challenges in implementing an integrated value chain in the sector, in the extractive sector? So you encounter the day-to-day challenges. You can speak from experience. So tell us. If you
yeah, I think there are plenty of challenges. And I think probably one of the bigger ones, I think all the panelists have mentioned, is around access to finance. There is limited access to finance, and without finance, it really hinders the participation in any integration or integrated value chains that you want to build. I don't think you'll have the capacity to do that. But besides finance, there are also other issues around access to power. I think the erratic and poor electricity supply really limits operations, and it leads to increases in operational cost, which prevents this ability to scale up. I think if we look at from a South African perspective, we've seen what access to power has done to the industry, an industry such as the smelting industry, where it was a growing industry, and it literally been crippled with the level of power supply that we've experienced from a South African perspective. Thirdly, I think another one is the network infrastructure, the rail infrastructure, regional travel, the roads. There needs to be a lot more that is done to improve and make those infrastructure a bit more efficient. And of course, digital infrastructure is one that is needed to be grown to enable the integration of value chains. And I think lastly, it's the even stages of development within the African countries. I think Africa is not homogeneous. There's a lot of underdevelopment across border in terms of physical infrastructure, as I've mentioned, the roads, rail, and electricity. And all of these, I think, with the free trade agreement, there's a lot of opportunities for them to be stimulated and develop. And if these issues can be tackled, I think there's a lot that we can gain out of this free trade agreement. Currently, without taking those issues into account or improving on them, I think there's going to be a massive challenge to get the full benefits of the trade agreement.
Wonderful. There you have it. There you have it. Finance, power, infrastructure. Great. It's interesting because when I take the example of Ghana with my experience with bauxite, with the advent of the Akosobo Dam today, the smelter, we're able to refine or add value, let me put it that way, to the raw material of bauxite, and we're able to export some form of aluminum. I'm no expert and I'm not pretending to be, but just to re-emphasize the need of these essentials, because how do you, and hence the need for the linkages, really. So all the other linkages and all the other economies that sprout, that build, that are established around the one project that may be implemented in one locality or the other. So that's a good one. Thank you very much, Mr. Ganju. I will come back to Prudence. Prudence, I think we know the challenges stated from a high-level perspective of this is where we are, we need financing, we need this, we need that. We also know the challenges around sibling rivalry and how, like you said, you're leaving a certain fraction of the legal framework for countries to manage at their level. What are some of the key trade facilitation initiatives that are being pursued by the Secretariat, really, to help support the mineral value chains and an AfCFTA-led industrialization?
Yes, thank you very much once again. Let me make just a quick comment on a very provocative intervention by Dr. Paul. I tend to agree with him that the AfCFTA is not fully fledged yet, but there is still hope. There is still hope that we will get there. Once Walt Disney said that if you can dream it, you can do it. We we are able to dream the AfCFTA, I'm sure we will have it. And the achievement so far is very promising. Having gone through the negotiation process, which is the hardest part, having achieved the level of entry into force, which is a political will, I think the implementation now lies in the hands of the private sector. Because in terms of what we have achieved in terms of the laws, let me now go to trade facilitation, for example, as related to your question. The AfCFTA agreement has a full annex that is dedicated to trade facilitation. And it also has another legal instrument that governs non-tariff barriers, elimination of non-tariff barriers. So some of the trade facilitation initiatives that I can see within the AfCFTA that will promote, of course, industrialization on the continent. Let me start with infrastructure development, because this is very key. And infrastructure development is one key pillar of the AfCFTA. For your information, actually, the AfCFTA, it creates a market, but it has two major pillars. One being industrialization, which we are talking about, and the second being infrastructure development. And infrastructure development is very important to support this process of industrialization. And here we are talking about trade-related infrastructure, of course, improving our roads network, railways, ports efficiency, providing energy, telecommunication services, and other facilities, IT infrastructure that will facilitate trade. This is one part which is very key, and governments are committed to handle this. The second aspect which will contribute to trade facilitation is, of course, a removal of tariff barriers, which I have talked about in my introductory remarks, but also removal of non-tariff barriers. And non-tariff barriers constitute a very significant challenge in terms of movement of goods across the continent, especially when you are taking goods from one region to the other, where the issues of non-tariff barriers were not addressed anywhere in the legal framework. So the AfCFTA provides for a full annex on non-tariff barriers elimination, but it also creates a continental mechanism to monitor and eliminate non-tariff barriers, which allows business operators to report instantly any non-tariff barrier on the road. And then the government officials in charge will be able to see it that there is a problem. They will have to communicate directly with their counterparts in other governments, and then they will have to address it. The third element, which I think is very important, and my predecessor has already alluded to it, is access to finance. I think this, I will leave it to Afreximbank to explain how much they are involved in supporting this trade finance aspect, because I know there are a number of initiatives in that area. The other element which the AfCFTA addresses clearly is issue of border management. The issue of border management efficiency at borders. The AfCFTA will make sure that we discuss with all the customs authorities. Now we have already established institution that brings together director generals of customs across the continent, and they discuss all these issues of customs procedures and border management. The issue of having a one-stop border post that will allow the speedy clearing of goods, the technological aspect of border management, such as electronic single windows, which have to be adopted by different customs authorities, electronic cargo tracking systems, the issue of simplified trade regime, which allows cross-border traders. So those are some of the key initiatives that AfCFTA has put emphasis on, not only in the legal framework, but also addressing them on the field, because we are working closely with all the DGs of customs across the continent, and they meet regularly. They meet regularly to monitor that those issues are addressed. Of course, we are still at the starting point. They have now met twice, but we believe this is a very good, I think, basis to achieve whatever that has to be achieved within the AfCFTA.
Yeah, thank you so much, Prudence. This is great. So yes, we're at the starting point, but so many things are happening, moving parts, a lot of parts are moving, and with the consolidated effort, definitely we will get there. Thank you, Prudence. I'm a bit conscious of time and I want to engage with my audience. I have an interesting question. So Zito, rather than taking another turn on you, if you don't mind, I'd like to pose a question. So a question from Ontatile, please pardon me if I massacre your name. Ontatile Lefatswana. So you say that you are interested in the cost of finance for the project preparatory fund facility, you mean. It will be important to compare with local DFIs for growing SMEs like yours. Is the 3-year repayment period from conclusion to BFS or from first payment? Zito?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Amma, for that question. First and foremost, with regards to funding, I sincerely believe outside of grant facilities, Afreximbank's project preparation facility is one of the most competitively priced facilities on the continent. I say so because most project preparation facilities that intervene in this particular space look at this as an equity investment. Afreximbank has deliberately opted to look at this as a commercial loan. So typical rates are LIBOR plus a margin and nothing above 10%, which is what most project preparation facilities will charge on the continent. And sorry, I didn't get the second question.
Is the 3-year repayment period from conclusion of BFS or from first payment?
Okay, yes, the 3-year period starts from the point at which you have at least a concept or a proof of concept as to what you want to do, all the way to financial close when we lock in and get to financial close of the longer term facility. And in our view, by the time you have a concept note, depending on the scale of the project, 3 years is an ample period. Again, this is not prescriptive, it's on a case-by-case basis, but the ballpark figure is around about 3 years.
So I hope your question has been answered. On Tatile, I have another question, and this is directed at Prudence. Prudence, this is a Pan-African conversation, so I'm going to read it as is, but I'll try and manage the text a bit. So it goes as follows. We all know Africa represents a huge market with more than 1 billion. First of all, it's from Edem Kluja. I believe, Edem, you are from Ghana. So it goes as follows. We all know Africa represents a huge market with more than 1 billion consumers, and other foreign players are seeing the continent as a place to pour out their products. As Africa prepares to develop this regional value chain, other players' countries won't be happy. They might even try to make AfCFTA project fail. What are some of the risks you see here and mitigations in place? I hope I've not ruffled any feathers.
I think this is very much clear. To me, the challenge has already been identified by Edem himself. This is the challenge itself that other players may not be happy and maybe, of course, trying to dump their products on AfCFTA market. I can only respond to the last question, what are the mitigation measures that are put in place by the AfCFTA? And this is very important to, again, refer back to the rules of origin, where I have mentioned the issue of dealing with transshipment. Transshipment means like if one border post is loose and let's say Chinese products end up in one country on the continent because their border controls were not seriously addressing those products, then the AfCFTA rules of origin, which will make sure that there is what we call a certificate of origin, which accompany every product, will make sure that those products cannot be circulated across the continent to all other countries. Because I don't think that a product will be imported from China and will have AfCFTA certificate of origin. That will not happen. So one of the measures that are already in place is that certificate of origin, the AfCFTA certificate of origin. And there will be a number of declaration forms which supplement that certificate of origin, where a supplier will have to fill that form, certifying that he's the one who is supplying that product, and the origin of that product has to be certified. So I think we shouldn't be worried about this. The market is big, is going to be attractive enough. But what I think we are going to encourage investors to do, instead of looking at AfCFTA market as a dumping ground, they rather have to come and establish on the continent and produce from there. If they really need that market, let them come, establish on the continent, and then sell their product when they are produced from the continent. And by doing so, they are contributing to investment, but they are also contributing to job creation. They are creating jobs and they are boosting our economies.
Thank you, Prudence. I'm overwhelmed with the questions, really. I have quite a lot of it. Let me take one from Serijiro. He says, I represent an indigenous Ghanaian integrated gold company. We're currently experiencing the access to capital issue being addressed. But one point, I'd like to know if the trade agreement looks at it as a debt threshold across the continent. Being in Ghana, we do not have debt financing because the central bank requires 120% collateral for financing. In the West and Eastern world, debt financing is truly debt, which creates a leverage opportunity for the project entrepreneur. This leverage is non-existent in Ghana. So what is being done to address this, or what programs are there currently that provide real debt financing? Would that be you, Zito?
Yes. Thank you for that question, Amma. So with regards to access to finance, what I'll advise is this is definitely something we're keen on and would like to take this conversation forward and have a one-on-one with them and see how best we can assist them, be it on the project preparation side, is it a structured trade finance solution or a project finance solution? So it's a conversation we can have and see how best we can assist them. But definitely this is of interest to see how we can partner with them. That notwithstanding, we do also have trade finance intermediaries that we work closely with in Ghana. And again, we'll also collaborate with them to see how best we can come up with a solution that's fit for purpose for this particular investor. Thank you.
Thank you, Zito. So for those asking to contact the project preparation units, we will share contacts to the units after the Q&A. May I take, with your kind permission, maybe 2 more questions, and then we will wrap up. A question from Tino Tenda. It goes as follows. The operationalization of the AfCFTA will continue to be undermined by the COVID pandemic. Have there been any adjustments to the results from bankability and feasibility studies incorporating the effects of the pandemic, particularly on mining projects, as it relates to trading and value addition of extractive commodities under the AfCFTA? If so, what are the exceptional findings? Would that be okay to direct that to Dr. Jordan or Prudence, since it cuts across both spaces? What are the findings of the study on the adjustment from bankability and feasibility studies incorporating the effect of the pandemic, particularly on mining projects?
Could I separate those? On mining projects, as we know, they're driven by commodity prices, which have been buoyant. We're all aware. So the one sector that's not been heavily hit by the pandemic is mining, because the prices are good. You know, look at the price of copper today. On the linkage projects, it's a different story. And I can only talk from being chair of a special economic zone in South Africa. And I can say that the pipeline has really slowed down the investment projects. And these are mainly value addition projects. These are manufacturing. And at those, those you can see that COVID has really dampened the seminal linkage projects. But the digging dirt projects are less, you know. I mean, there's always people who want to dig our dirt and go and that add value in other countries and obviously be absorbed by those countries. Right now, your biggest market is China, so they'll make sure that these projects are capitalized because they need the products. I think I've made it clear that the seminal linkage projects have been hit by COVID, and we need to focus on that. We need solutions for that, or we'll just slip back again to digging dirt rather than adding value. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jordan. No room for slipping back. Another question from Abigail Olagbaye. It goes as follows. What is the place of tourism as a business and tool for socioeconomic development in the framework of AfCFTA? Monsieur Prudence?
Yes, that's a very good question from Abigail. Tourism is a very important sector that has to be considered on the continent. And the AfCFTA comprises of trade in goods and trade in services, and tourism is one of the service sectors. Currently, the heads of state have prioritized 5 service sectors, and one of them is tourism. The other one is telecommunication services, then transport services, financial services, and business services. So if you look at those 5 priority service sectors, then tourism is one of them. And currently, we are not only addressing the liberalization of those services to allow trade across countries, but also developing what we call regulatory frameworks that will facilitate, again, transactions across the continent in those sectors. So tourism is taken care of. We are also undertaking the private sector development strategy study, which is identifying the key value chains to be developed on the continent. And we believe that tourism can also be part of those key value chains that have to be focused on in terms of development perspective of the continent.
Thank you, Prudence. We're not too well on time, much as I'd love to take a last question, but I think we will pause for today. Participants, thank you for your engagement. Thank you for your interactivity. We will share the contacts for the project preparation units, and feel free to engage, connect, and then explore further. At this stage, I would like to call on Mr. Ibrahim. Oh, first of all, I'd like to thank you, panelists. Really, thank you so much. I got carried away. Thank you so much for the insights. Thank you for your engagement. This is a conversation starter, as we said. There would definitely be opportunity for more discussion, even beyond the confines of a webinar. And I'm more than happy to walk this journey. It's been very insightful for myself as well. So thank you very much, panelists, our dear esteemed panelists. Calling on Mr. Ibrahim Sanya, who is the Global Head and Director, Advisory and Capital Market at Afreximbank, to deliver the closing remarks. Monsieur Ibrahim, vous avez la parole.
Bonjour, my colleagues, distinguished guests. It's a pleasure to have you all and to have the great privilege to share some parting words. As we all know, infrastructure development is the most vital trigger for optimizing Africa's economic growth. Africa, while probably the most endowed geography for any given mineral, is neither present at the discussion table when discussing pricing for minerals. Nor it is an employer of significance in the mining sector, except for South Africa. As you've heard today from our distinguished keynote speaker, until we scale up leverage from the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and ensure beneficiation, we will not be able to capture a higher proportion of the value created in the mineral sector. We all were also reminded of the crucial requirement to align our regional approaches and the value chain importance. The key value residing in the theme of access to finance, project viability, and bankability was also emphasized by the head of project preparation and the members of the panel. It is in occasions like today that we are reminded why we are here is often because of where we come from. And it is most important that we be reminded of the imperative of what needs to be done differently. Our constrained circumstances are not accidental. Much of it is by design. Therefore, to fix it, we must do it by design. Speaking about design, if I'm able to leave you with one and only one image today, I will leave you with the following. The bank was created almost 30 years ago. Until the current president of the bank took over the helm almost 5 years now, the bank has been a robust chair standing on one stool. And that stool has been anchored around lending and guarantees. Over the last 5 years, the president, his EVPs, and the board instructed us to develop 3 more stools. One stool around equity financing. The vehicle is called FEDA, Fund for Export Development for Africa, and it provides equity for trade-related projects and companies. The second stool is an investment banking arm. It is called ACMA, Advisory and Capital Market. It is responsible for coordinating bankability, capital raise, whether in immature transaction within the private placement industry or in a public sector and public markets. As of today, the department and that side and that stool has been responsible of sourcing over $2 billion this year alone outside the bank. And our remit is to work closely with different segments of the bank to raise capital for projects from the bank and outside the bank. The last tool is project preparation that you are discovering today. And it is responsible for enhancing feasibility, preparation, project development, and also bankability. And the synergies between those different stools of the chair is becoming highly visible. And as we further collaborate with each and every one of you, that synergy will be greatly visible across the continent. As we were aptly reminded today by our Honorable EVP, Mr. Amar, the project preparation unit of the bank is established to serve as a catalyst for more successful projects across Africa and for more business between ourselves. This is a game changer, and we are each invited to collaborate to do more so that together we ultimately go further in the development agenda of the continent, further for every African on the continent. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to seeing you in the next webinar.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sanya. Together, together, together. We can't do it alone. We work together, we achieve, and we win together. This has been a very educative, insightful, and an utmost pleasure for me. I don't know about you, I've really enjoyed the session. EVP Kamel, thank you for your time. Our esteemed panelists, Dr. Paul Jordan, Mr. Prudence Sebaizi, Mr. Komi Tou, Mr. Timberlani Gancho, Mr. Zito Alfanyo, and of course, Mr. Ibrahim Sanya. Thank you so much for your time. And to our cherished audience on Zoom and on social media, thank you for your participation. Thank you for your interactivity. It's a wrap for today, but I look forward to seeing you next time. Here you are with the contacts of the project preparation units. Feel free to engage with us on social, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Thank you for your time, and bye for now.